Hello and welcome to Lynchburg Live. I'm your host, Linda Smith. Before we get started with tonight's show, I'd like to ask that you remember our friends at Gleaning for the World with your donations. They're attempting now to send relief not only to Haiti, but to Chile as well. My guest tonight is Darrell Laurant, columnist for the Lynchburg News in Advance. He's an author, a local celebrity. I took a class from him once, so I think he qualifies as a teacher. Darrell, I'm so pleased to have you on the show.
I'm glad to be here. We match.
We do match.
Yeah.
I think everybody in our audience who reads the Lynchburg News or has seen it once is aware of your column. And I know that I have so many friends who enjoy it, and of course I enjoy reading your column. I'd like the audience to know a little bit about you and your interest in journalism. Have you always been interested in writing?
When I was, I think, in third grade, I had a little newspaper that I delivered around the neighborhood, and they paid me like a quarter for it or something like that. But I was a history major in college, which helped me get my first job out of college, which was washing dishes in a Howard Johnson's. They were very impressed with my history degree. And then I moved from there to running a Ferris wheel. And my parents were puzzled by that. They said, "We're confused. We sent you to college and you're running a Ferris wheel." But eventually I moved down to South Carolina and just started working for a newspaper down there, a weekly paper. And I was a kind of jack of all trades for them. And then I became a sports writer with the Charleston paper and came up to Lynchburg as a sports writer. And started writing a column in '81. So
that's here in Lynchburg. You've been since '81. Where were you born?
In the lovely hamlet of Sanford, North Carolina.
I couldn't tell. I can't tell. You lose your accent when you move from place to place.
I didn't stay there long. I said my first words were, "Get me out of here." I grew up in pretty much. Actually, it's interesting because I grew up in upstate New York, so I'm essentially a Yankee, I guess. But I've also lived in some kind of archetypal southern cities. I've lived in Atlanta, New Orleans, Charleston, and Charlotte, and Lynchburg, I guess.
So you've lived north and south.
So I can go either way.
And I'm sure gathered.
Can't shake the accent.
You've probably gathered information and material for columns as you've come along. All right. What made you decide to come to Lynchburg?
Well,
and choose it as a home.
I didn't even know where it was when I came here. I had no idea. I had worked for the newspaper in Charleston, and a coworker of mine and I quit the newspaper to start a magazine, a sports magazine, and it went down in flames after about 6 months because we knew nothing about business. We were in our early 20s and knew nothing. And so we were too proud to go back and ask for our old jobs back. So I just sent letters to every newspaper in the Western Hemisphere, and Lynchburg was the first one, and I think the only one to respond. So I took a Trailways bus all night to come up here to interview.
When did you move your family up? Was in '81?
Oh, that was '77.
77.
I was a sports writer for 3 years, a sports editor for 2, and then started writing the column.
So when you came to Lynchburg, you were immediately employed by the Lynchburg News.
Oh yeah.
There's something in the back of my mind that you've told me years ago. Didn't you work in an emergency room somewhere?
I did. That was in South Carolina. I did that for about a year and a half. And I always say it was a great job to prepare me for journalism because the hours were bad, the pay was bad, and I learned to function amidst chaos. So it worked, and really met some really interesting people, for better or for worse.
Having worked in a hospital most of my life, I certainly can relate to the interesting people that you meet. In just talking to you, I'm thinking every experience you've had, you must have picked up information and material for what you're writing now.
Oh, sure.
Have you ever been just a newspaper reporter as opposed to a columnist or a feature writer?
Well, yeah, I still do a lot of that actually, because we're a small paper, so the column is 3 times a week, and usually I do a couple other stories a week. And features, I like to do features, and I don't do much of the covering government meetings and that sort of thing unless I'm, dragged kicking and screaming into it. But,
that's what I was going to ask you. If you go out on location or if you know something's happening, if you go and report on that, are you bring information back for your column?
Oh yeah, I mean when you can. Like for instance, I'm doing a story for this weekend on Carl Hutcherson, the former mayor, and who we all know ran into some problems. And what he's doing now, he's now the pastor of First Baptist South Lynchburg Church. So I went to church over there on Sunday just to get a sense of how the congregation related to him and what he was doing, and that made for a lot better story than if I had just talked to somebody on the phone. I like to try to talk to people in person if I can. Of course, you can't always.
You know, that was one of my questions I'd planned to ask you later, but since we've already hit on it, do you find things, events, and that kind of thing that you think would be very interesting for a column and make it, and specifically go for that reason?
Oh, usually.
Like, there was something in a column recently that you wrote that made me think that you had gone.
Although the problem is when I just go somewhere for fun, people are like, "Oh, when's this going to be in the paper?" I'm like, then you have to say, "Well, it's not. I'm just here for fun."
Cool. How did you begin doing this column? I mean, specifically, just your thoughts and interviewing people and that kind of thing.
Well, we were bought by a chain. When I first came to this paper, we were a family-owned paper. It was sort of freestanding. We had no other papers connected with us. We were bought by a chain, and they decided they wanted to have a local columnist. And when I became sports editor, I told them that I would make a terrible sports editor, and because I can't even keep track of my own life, much less 6 other people. And they said, well, we'll give you these tests to see what kind of management person you'd be. And I failed all the tests, and they said, well, we don't care. We want you to do it anyway. So I proved myself right. I really was not a very good, administrative type person. So, but I was the only person who wrote a column because I did it as a sports editor. And I think they wanted me to be the columnist, and they also wanted to get rid of me as sports editor, and that way they could do it, as I wanted to be gotten rid of. So.
It's like with dignity.
Yeah.
All right. Years ago, I took a writing class from you, and one of the things that you taught your students was to write what they knew. And I think you gave us several exercises, sit down and write about your Aunt Sarah or that kind of thing. So is that your approach?
Well, yes and no, because the problem with newspapers is we're always operating from a position of ignorance. So you're often writing about what you don't know. When I came to Charleston as a sports writer, it was that summer they would assign different people a column to do for the summer on a particular sport that was going on, and so they said, okay, you're the auto racing writer. And I said, but I don't know anything about cars. They said, well, that's okay. You just fake it. So I would ask the drivers. I covered Darlington a lot and some of the races around the Carolinas, and I'd talk to some of these drivers, and they'd respond in car speak, and I would say, well, now how would you explain that to some of our readers who might not know anything about cars? Meaning me, but I didn't say that. One thing I've learned is that most people, the only people, and I hope nobody out here takes offense, because I have a lot of friends who are college professors, but college professors are the only people who take offense at ignorance. They'll say, what, you didn't read my book, that I wrote on this, 15 years ago? But most people, if you just admit to them that you have no idea what they're talking about, they're usually very good at explaining it. And one of the things I've learned, too, is that people don't like to talk about themselves. They love to talk about what they do.
Right.
So if you can get them going on that. People are very uncomfortable talking about themselves, usually.
Right. Years ago, you went to Roanoke. I was up there as a guest host for George Takei, who played Sulu on Star Trek. And you came up and did an interview with him. Have you interviewed other well-known media people?
Oh, yeah, over the years. I mean, it's surprising the people that come through Lynchburg. We've had, several presidents have come through here, and the colleges bring a lot of them in. So, yeah, and of course, it's hard to come up with these off the top of my head, but trust me, we've had, we all have. Everybody on the staff has had occasion to, to interview. Like we had, I remember when Oliver